Have you ever caught yourself waiting for someone to come and make everything feel all right? Maybe you have never said it out loud. Maybe you would never even describe it as waiting. But somewhere inside, perhaps there is a quiet hope that one day someone will finally understand you deeply enough, love you completely enough, apologize sincerely enough, or simply arrive at the right moment and remove the weight you have been carrying for so long. And when that person does not come, you may begin to wonder what is wrong. You look around and see other people moving forward. You see relationships that appear easier than yours. You see people who seem supported, certain, connected, and at peace. Meanwhile, you may feel as though you are standing at the edge of your own life, waiting for something to change before you can finally breathe. But what if the waiting itself is part of what keeps you from peace? What if nobody is coming, not because you have been forgotten, but because there is a part of this journey that no other human being can walk for you? There are moments in life when this realization can sound frightening. Nobody is coming can sound like abandonment. It can sound like loneliness. It can sound as though life has closed the door and left you to figure everything out by yourself. But perhaps there is another way to hear those words. Perhaps they are not saying, you are alone. Perhaps they are saying, you are free. No one else has to change before you can begin returning to yourself. No one has to apologize before you can release what you have been carrying. No one has to understand your heart before you can honor it. No one has to recognize your worth before you can stop questioning it. And no circumstance has to become perfect before you can discover a small place of peace within yourself. This does not mean that you should reject people. It does not mean you should refuse love, friendship, guidance, or support. We are connected beings. We need one another. We learn through one another. We experience love through relationships, kindness, companionship, and shared moments. But there is a difference between receiving love and asking another person to become the source of your wholeness. Perhaps you know this feeling. Someone hurts you, and you wait for the apology. You imagine what they should say. You replay conversations in your mind. You picture the moment when they finally understand how deeply their actions affected you. You tell yourself that when they acknowledge what happened, something inside you will finally settle. Days pass, sometimes years pass. The apology never comes. And without realizing it, your peace remains tied to a person who may not even know they are holding it. The ego often works this way. It creates conditions for peace. I will be peaceful when they change. I will feel worthy when they choose me. I will let go when they admit they were wrong. I will trust life when I know what happens next. I will love myself when I become someone better. And so life becomes an endless waiting room. You wait for approval. You wait for certainty. You wait for recognition. You wait for the relationship. You wait for the answer. You wait for the perfect moment when everything outside you finally lines up in a way that gives you permission to feel okay inside. Yet the outside world has never been very good at staying arranged according to our expectations. People change. Relationships change. Bodies age. Plans disappear. Seasons turn. What once seemed certain becomes uncertain again. If your inner peace depends upon everything outside you remaining the way you prefer, then peace will always feel fragile. Imagine holding a glass of water in your hand while walking through a crowded room. If your attention is completely fixed on making sure nobody bumps into you, every person becomes a threat. Every movement creates tension. You become exhausted trying to control the room. But perhaps the deeper invitation is not to control everyone around you. Perhaps it is to become aware of how tightly you are holding the glass. There is something extraordinary that begins to happen when you notice this. You begin to see that much of your exhaustion may not come from life itself. It may come from your struggle with how you believe life should be. You wanted someone to stay, and they left. You wanted someone to understand, and they misunderstood. You wanted certainty, and life gave you a question. You wanted a clear path, and instead you found yourself standing in fog. The pain of these experiences is real. Spiritual awareness does not ask you to pretend otherwise. It does not ask you to smile when your heart is hurting or call every painful experience a blessing. It simply invites you to look beneath the pain and notice what else you may be carrying with it. Perhaps beneath the sadness there is resistance. Perhaps beneath the anger there is an expectation. Perhaps beneath the anxiety there is a desperate attempt to control tomorrow. And perhaps beneath all of these things there is a quiet self that has never actually disappeared. Think about the sky during a storm. Dark clouds can cover everything. Thunder can make the whole world seem unsettled. For a while, you may forget that blue sky exists at all. But the clouds never destroy the sky. They only pass through it. Your fear may be like that. Your resentment may be like that. Your loneliness may be like that. Your thoughts may become so loud that they convince you they are who you are. But perhaps they are simply weather moving through a much larger awareness. The peaceful self within you does not need to be manufactured. It does not need to be earned. You do not have to become worthy enough to receive it. You may simply have forgotten it beneath everything you have been carrying. This is why doing it alone has a different meaning when viewed spiritually. It does not mean building walls around your heart and saying, "I don't need anyone." That is often another voice of fear. It means recognizing that there are certain inner choices nobody can make on your behalf. Someone can remind you that you are worthy, but they cannot make you believe it. Someone can apologize to you, but they cannot make you forgive. Someone can sit beside you in your grief, but they cannot release your grief for you. Someone can show you a doorway, but eventually your feet must cross it. And perhaps that is not a punishment. Perhaps that is the dignity of being alive. There comes a moment when you realize that the person you have been waiting for is not going to arrive carrying the missing piece of you. Because there was never a missing piece. There were only layers. Layers of fear, layers of judgment, layers of old stories, layers of resentment, layers of beliefs about who you were supposed to become before you could finally love yourself. And slowly, awareness begins removing those layers, not by force, not through another battle with yourself, but simply by seeing. You begin noticing when you are seeking approval. You notice when another person's mood determines your own. You notice when your mind travels into tomorrow and demands guarantees that life cannot provide. You notice when you compare your path with someone else's and immediately feel that you are behind. And instead of judging yourself for these patterns, you become curious. Why am I giving this moment so much power over my peace? That question can open something inside you. Maybe you have spent years trying to become the person who will finally deserve love. You have tried to be easier to understand, more agreeable, more useful, less emotional, less demanding. You have learned to say yes when your heart wanted to say no because you were afraid that disappointing someone would mean losing them. This is how people-pleasing can quietly become a form of self-abandonment. You leave yourself first so that someone else will not leave you. And eventually, you become tired. Not merely physically tired, but tired in the soul. Because maintaining a version of yourself designed to keep everyone else comfortable requires enormous energy. Then one day, perhaps in a quiet room, perhaps after another disappointment, perhaps during a long drive when there is nobody to distract you, a realization begins to appear. You cannot spend your entire life asking the world for permission to be yourself. Something within you already knows this. There is an intelligence in life that does not need your constant supervision. A seed beneath the soil does not panic because it cannot see the sunlight. A river does not stand still trying to understand every bend before it continues toward the sea. Nature moves with a kind of trust, and perhaps there is something in you that remembers how to live that way. The ego says, know everything before you move. The deeper self whispers, be present, and the next step will appear. The ego says, make them understand you. The deeper self asks, can you understand yourself? The ego says, someone needs to make this right. The deeper self asks, what are you ready to release? This is where the journey changes. You stop asking, who is coming to save me? And you begin asking, what am I being invited to remember? Maybe what you remember is that peace was never something another person could hand you. Maybe you remember that love is not merely something you receive, it is something you are capable of expressing because it already exists within your nature. Maybe you remember that forgiveness is not surrendering your dignity. It is refusing to carry yesterday into every tomorrow. Maybe you remember that being uncertain does not mean being lost. And maybe beneath all the noise, you begin sensing something that has been quietly present through every disappointment, every ending, every lonely night, every moment when you thought you could not continue. You were there. The awareness, noticing it all, was there. The life within you was there. The quiet presence beneath the fear was there. And perhaps what some call the source has never been separate from that deepest place within you. This does not mean that tomorrow suddenly becomes easy. It means you no longer have to wait for tomorrow to give you permission to be at peace today. So if you are waiting right now for someone to return, for someone to change, for someone to choose you, for someone to understand you, or simply for life to finally become what you hoped it would be, perhaps you can hold one gentle possibility in your heart. What if the absence of the rescuer is not the end of your story? What if it is the beginning of your return? Because the moment you stop looking toward the door, waiting for someone else to enter and bring you back to life, you may finally notice something extraordinary. There is already a light on inside the room, and it has been waiting for you to turn toward it. Once you begin to recognize that the light is already within the room, another question naturally appears. If peace has always been somewhere within you, why has it sometimes felt so far away? Perhaps the answer is not that peace disappeared. Perhaps something simply became louder than it. The ego can be very loud, not because it is evil, and not because it needs to become your enemy. The ego is simply that part of the mind that builds an identity from what happens around you. It collects experiences, labels, memories, comparisons, fears, victories, disappointments, and opinions, and then quietly says, "This is who you are." It remembers who rejected you. It remembers when you failed. It remembers what someone said about you years ago. It notices who seems to have more than you. It worries about what might happen tomorrow. And then it tries to protect the identity it has created by controlling as much of life as possible. This is why the idea that nobody is coming can initially frighten the ego. The ego wants guarantees. It wants someone to promise that everything will work out exactly as expected. It wants someone strong enough, wise enough, loving enough, or certain enough to remove uncertainty from your life. But life rarely offers that kind of guarantee, and perhaps it was never supposed to. There is a difference between living with support and living dependent upon certainty. You may have loving people around you. You may have friends who listen, family who cares, teachers who guide, or someone who holds your hand through a difficult season. These relationships can be beautiful. They are part of the richness of being human. But even the most loving person cannot promise you that nothing will change. And when you ask another human being to make you feel permanently safe in an impermanent world, you place a burden on both of you that neither can carry. Consider how this appears in relationships. Perhaps someone you love becomes distant one day. Their messages become shorter. Their voice sounds different. Maybe they are simply tired. Maybe they are dealing with something you do not know about. But your mind begins creating a story. Something is wrong. They are losing interest. I must have done something. What if they leave? Within minutes, you may no longer be responding to the person in front of you. You are responding to an old fear. Maybe the fear began long before this relationship. Perhaps someone once left unexpectedly. Perhaps love in your childhood felt conditional. Perhaps you learned that being useful, quiet, successful, agreeable, or pleasing was the safest way to remain connected to people. And now the ego uses those memories as evidence. It says, be careful, this has happened before. So you begin watching every word. You search for signs. You overthink silence. You try to control the relationship so that you will not have to experience the pain of losing it. Yet something strange happens when fear tries to protect love. It often makes love harder to experience. Love needs space. Fear wants guarantees. Love says, I am here. Fear asks, will you still be here tomorrow? Love allows another person to be who they are. Fear quietly asks them to become who you need them to be so that you can feel safe. And awareness begins when you can notice this difference without condemning yourself. You might simply say inwardly, there is fear here. Not, I am fearful. Not, something is wrong with me. Simply, there is fear here. That small change creates space. You are no longer completely inside the emotion. You are witnessing it. And the moment you can witness something, you are no longer entirely controlled by it. This is one of the quiet miracles of awareness. Imagine standing beside a river. If you fall into the current, the water carries you wherever it goes. But when you sit on the bank, you can watch the water move without needing to follow every leaf downstream. Thoughts can be like that river. A thought appears, I am not enough. Another appears, nobody really cares. Then another, I should be further ahead. And another, what if my life never changes? You do not deliberately create most of these thoughts. They simply arrive. The difficulty begins when you believe that every thought deserves your obedience. The ego says, if you thought it, it must be true. Awareness asks, is that so? Perhaps you have had 1,000 thoughts about your future that never became reality. You have imagined disasters that never happened. You have worried about conversations that turned out differently. You have prepared yourself for rejection that never came. And even when something difficult did happen, you may have discovered strength, wisdom, kindness, or support that your frightened mind could not have predicted. So perhaps anxiety is not always asking you to solve the future. Sometimes it is asking you to return to the present. The present moment has a simplicity that the ego often dislikes. Right now, you are breathing. Right now, you are listening. Right now, there may be sounds around you that you were not noticing a moment ago. Right now, life is happening without asking you to understand the next 10 years. The ego lives comfortably in psychological time. It visits yesterday and asks what should have happened differently. Then it travels into tomorrow and asks what might go wrong. And while it moves between regret and anticipation, the present moment quietly passes unnoticed. This is why control can become so exhausting. You may believe you are controlling life, but often you are only arguing with uncertainty. You create plans, and plans can be useful. You make thoughtful decisions, and that is part of living responsibly. But beneath healthy preparation, there can sometimes be another movement. The belief that if you think hard enough, anticipate enough, or worry enough, you can prevent life from surprising you. Perhaps you know what it feels like to lie awake at night rehearsing tomorrow. You imagine what you will say. You imagine what they might say. You create 5 possible outcomes and prepare yourself emotionally for each one. The body is lying in bed, but the mind is living through futures that do not yet exist. And by morning, you are exhausted from experiences that never happened. What if you did not need to know everything tonight? What if uncertainty were not a sign that life had abandoned you? Look at a tree in winter. If you had never seen the seasons before, you might believe something had gone terribly wrong. The leaves disappear, the branches look empty, growth becomes invisible. Yet the tree does not panic. Life is still moving where you cannot see it. Roots continue their quiet work beneath the earth. Then, when the season changes, what looked empty begins to bloom again. There may be seasons of your life like this. You cannot see what is happening. A relationship ends. A plan collapses. A familiar identity no longer fits. Something you believed would last forever changes. The ego looks at the bare branches and says, everything is gone. But perhaps awareness can ask a gentler question. What might be growing where I cannot yet see? This does not mean every loss is secretly pleasant. Loss hurts because something mattered. If someone you love leaves your life, spiritual understanding does not require you to pretend you do not miss them. You can grieve and still be awake. You can cry and still trust life. You can feel sadness without turning sadness into a permanent identity. There is an enormous difference between saying, I am experiencing loss, and saying, I am lost. One describes a season. The other turns the season into the self. The ego does this constantly. Something fails, and it says, I am a failure. Someone rejects you, and it says, I am unwanted. You feel lonely, and it says, I am alone. You make a mistake, and it says, I am not good enough. Awareness gently separates the experience from the identity. A painful thing happened, but the painful thing is not who you are. You are the awareness capable of noticing the pain. And perhaps that awareness is closer to your true nature than any story you have ever told about yourself. Comparison is another way we forget this. You look at someone else's life and measure your inner experience against their outer appearance. They seem more confident. They seem happier. Their relationship seems stronger. Their purpose seems clearer. They seem to know where they are going while you are still trying to understand where you are. Then the ego quietly asks, why not you? The question may sound innocent, but beneath it is often the belief that life is a race and that someone else reaching a certain place means you are behind. But have you ever looked at a garden and wondered why the rose is not blooming at the same time as the tree beside it? Nature does not seem embarrassed by different rhythms. Some seeds open quickly. Others spend a long time beneath the soil. Some trees grow tall. Others grow wide. Each expression has its own movement. Perhaps your life does too. The problem with comparison is not simply that it makes you unhappy. It pulls you away from your own experience. You become so occupied with someone else's path that you stop listening to yours. You ask, what are they doing? Instead of, what is life asking of me? You ask, why am I not there yet? Instead of, where am I right now? and perhaps where you are right now deserves your attention. Not because it is perfect, because it is real. Your spiritual life does not happen somewhere else. It happens here. In the conversation you are avoiding, in the resentment you keep carrying, in the anxiety you feel before sleep, in the moment you want approval, in the silence after someone disappoints you, in the choice between reacting from fear and responding from awareness. This is where transformation becomes real. Not in grand spiritual ideas, but in ordinary moments. Suppose someone criticizes you. The old pattern may be immediate. Your body tightens. Your mind prepares a defense. You want to prove them wrong or make them understand your intentions. But imagine noticing the reaction before becoming it. You breathe. You listen. You ask yourself, what exactly am I defending? Maybe their criticism is useful. Maybe it is not. Maybe it says more about them than about you. But you begin to understand that another person's opinion does not have to become an emergency inside your nervous system. You can hear something without allowing it to define you. This is inner freedom, and it is very different from becoming indifferent. Indifference closes the heart. Freedom keeps the heart open without giving everything permission to enter and rearrange your sense of self. The same is true of people-pleasing. Perhaps you have spent much of your life trying not to disappoint anyone. You answer messages when you are exhausted. You agree when you want to decline. You hide your feelings because you fear being difficult. You carry responsibilities nobody explicitly asked you to carry. Then resentment appears. You wonder why people take so much from you. But perhaps awareness eventually reveals something uncomfortable and liberating. Sometimes people did not take your peace. You gave it away because you were afraid that saying no would cost you love. Seeing this does not require self-blame. You were doing what you knew how to do. Perhaps pleasing people once protected you. Perhaps it helped you feel safe. Perhaps it became a way of earning, belonging, but a pattern that protected you in one season can imprison you in another. Awareness lets you thank the pattern for what it tried to do and gently release it. You begin to discover that love does not require self-abandonment. You can care about someone and disagree with them. You can love someone and say no. You can understand their pain without making yourself responsible for fixing it. You can allow someone to be disappointed in you without immediately concluding that you have done something wrong. This may feel uncomfortable at first. The ego prefers familiar suffering to unfamiliar freedom. Familiar suffering feels predictable. If you have always been the person who rescues everyone, what happens when you stop? If you have always been the one who apologizes first, what happens when you allow silence? If you have always measured your worth by being needed, who are you when nobody needs anything from you? These questions can feel frightening because they bring you close to an identity beneath your roles. You are not merely the helper. You are not merely the parent. You are not merely the partner. You are not merely the successful one, the responsible one, the wounded one, the rejected one, or the strong one. Those may be roles you have lived, but who is aware of all those roles? Who were you before you learned that you needed to prove yourself? There is something beneath the performance. And perhaps your deepest spiritual work is not adding another identity, but allowing unnecessary identities to fall away. This becomes especially powerful as you grow older. Aging has a way of revealing what cannot be kept. The body changes. Roles change. Children grow. Careers end. People enter and leave. The mirror reflects different seasons. The ego may resist because it built security around forms that were always temporary. But perhaps aging also carries an invitation. If everything you can point to changes, maybe your deepest identity cannot be found in anything that changes. There is a presence within you that watched childhood become adulthood. It watched your face change. It watched relationships begin and end. It watched beliefs evolve. It watched you become versions of yourself you once could not imagine. The scenery changed, but something was present for all of it. Perhaps this quiet witness is worth becoming familiar with. You may discover it in silence. Not a forced silence in which you desperately try to stop thinking, but a gentle silence in which you allow everything to be as it is. You sit for a moment. You breathe. A thought comes. You let it come. A memory appears. You let it appear. An emotion rise. You do not immediately fix it. And gradually you begin noticing that there is space around everything you experience. The thought is there, but so is awareness. The fear is there, but so is awareness. The sadness is there, but so is awareness. And awareness itself is not frightened. It simply sees. This is why you do not have to fight the ego. Fighting the ego can become another ego project. You do not need to declare war on your fear. You do not need to punish yourself for attachment. You do not need to feel ashamed when you want approval. You simply become aware. Light does not fight darkness. When light enters a room, darkness disappears because darkness was never a thing that needed to be defeated. It was the absence of seeing. Perhaps many of your old patterns are similar. Once you see them clearly, they begin losing their authority. You notice yourself waiting for a message to feel worthy. You see it. You notice yourself replaying an argument because you want to be right. You see it. You notice yourself comparing your life with another person's life. You see it. You notice yourself trying to control tomorrow. You see it. And instead of saying, I must stop doing this, perhaps you can ask, what is this pattern afraid of? Often beneath control is fear. Beneath comparison is a fear of inadequacy. Beneath people-pleasing is a fear of rejection. Beneath resentment may be pain that never felt acknowledged. Beneath the need to be right may be a frightened identity trying to protect itself. When you meet the fear beneath the pattern with compassion, something softens. You stop treating yourself like a problem that needs fixing. You begin treating yourself like a human being who is remembering. And this brings us back to those words. Nobody is coming. Perhaps nobody is coming to rescue you from your inner world because your inner world is not a prison from which you need rescue. It may be a doorway. The loneliness you keep escaping may contain something you need to hear. The resentment you keep replaying may be pointing towards something you are ready to forgive. The uncertainty you keep trying to control may be teaching you trust. The relationship you keep trying to force may be teaching you how to release. The approval you keep chasing may be revealing where you have forgotten your own worth. Suddenly, do it alone begins to mean something completely different. It does not mean walk through life without love. It means stop abandoning yourself while waiting for love. It does not mean refuse help. It means receive help without turning another person into your source. It does not mean close your heart. It means discover a heart so rooted in love that another person's inability to love you in the way you hope does not turn you against yourself. And perhaps there is an even deeper realization waiting here. When you stop demanding that another human being become your source of peace, you may begin sensing a connection that was there before any relationship entered your life. Call it life. Call it spirit. Call it consciousness. Call it the source. The name matters less than the experience. There is something larger than the fearful identity you have been protecting. You sense it when you watch the ocean and become quiet for reasons you cannot explain. You sense it when you stand beneath a night sky and suddenly your problems feel smaller, not because they are meaningless, but because you remember that your life belongs to something vast. You sense it in forgiveness. You sense it in gratitude. You sense it in those rare moments when you stop trying to become somebody and simply exist. Maybe this is why letting go can feel like coming home. You thought you were losing control, but perhaps you were releasing an illusion. You thought you needed someone to save you. But perhaps what you needed was to stop believing you were incomplete. You thought peace would arrive when the world finally behaved according to your expectations. But perhaps peace begins when you stop asking the world to carry a responsibility that belongs to your awareness. And now another doorway appears, because awareness can show you the patterns that keep you bound, but seeing them is only the beginning. Eventually, there comes a moment when you are invited to release what you have seen, to forgive what you no longer want to carry, to surrender what you cannot control, to love without possession, to trust without guarantees, and perhaps most importantly, to discover who remains when the old stories no longer tell you who you are. That is where the journey begins to turn inward in an entirely new way, not toward the person you are trying to become, toward the self that has been quietly waiting beneath everything you thought you had to be. When the old stories begin to loosen their grip, you may expect to feel immediately free. Sometimes you do. But often there is another experience first. There is space. And space can feel unfamiliar. If you have spent years defining yourself through what happened to you, through who loved you, who rejected you, who needed you, who disappointed you, or what you were trying to prove, then releasing those stories may leave you with a quiet question. Who am I without all of this? It is tempting to fill that space quickly. The ego likes identities because identities feel safe. It would rather replace one story with another than remain still long enough to discover what exists beneath every story. But perhaps you do not need another definition. Perhaps you need silence. There is a kind of silence that does not feel empty. It feels alive. You may experience it early in the morning before the world becomes noisy, or while walking beneath trees, or sitting alone after everyone else has gone to sleep. For a few moments, you are not trying to improve yourself. You are not defending yourself. You are not rehearsing the future or repairing the past. You are simply here. And in that simple presence, something becomes clear. You do not have to become someone else to deserve this moment. This is the beginning of returning to your true self, not creating it, not achieving it, remembering it. For many people, however, there is something standing between the present moment and that remembrance. The past, perhaps someone hurt you deeply. Maybe they betrayed your trust. Maybe they left when you needed them. Maybe they spoke words you still hear years later. Perhaps they never acknowledged what they did. You may have continued living. You may have changed jobs, changed homes, entered new relationships, celebrated birthdays, smiled in photographs, and told yourself that you had moved on. Yet sometimes one memory can bring the entire experience back. The body tightens. The conversation begins again in your mind. You remember what you should have said. You imagine what they should have said. And suddenly, a person who is not even in the room is shaping the emotional quality of the present moment. This is where forgiveness becomes one of the deepest forms of inner freedom. Forgiveness does not mean saying that what happened was acceptable. It does not require reconciliation. It does not mean inviting harmful behavior back into your life. And it certainly does not require you to deny your pain. Forgiveness can simply mean that you are no longer willing to use your own heart as a place to store the injury. Imagine carrying a stone everywhere you go because someone else placed it in your hands years ago. At first, you carry it because the wound is fresh. Then you carry it because you want them to understand what they did. Eventually, you may forget why you are carrying it. You simply know that your hands are tired. Forgiveness is the moment you realize you can put the stone down. The person who gave it to you does not have to be present. They do not have to agree. They do not even have to know. Your freedom does not require their participation. And this may be one of the most important meanings of doing it alone. Nobody can forgive for you. Someone can encourage you. Someone can listen to your story. Someone can remind you that you deserve peace. But there is a private moment within the heart when you decide that the past has taken enough from the present. That moment belongs to you. Maybe you are not ready to forgive everything today. That is all right. Forgiveness does not need to become another demand you place upon yourself. You might simply become willing to imagine a life in which you no longer carry the same resentment. Even willingness creates an opening. You might ask yourself, who would I be if I did not need this person to understand what they did? Notice what that question touches. Perhaps sadness appears. Perhaps anger. Perhaps relief. Perhaps fear. Sometimes we hold resentment because we believe releasing it means losing our evidence that we were wronged. But your pain does not need resentment in order to be valid. You can honor what happened and still choose peace. You can remember without continuing to relive. And when you begin doing this, you may discover that forgiveness is not really about changing your relationship with the person who hurt you. It changes your relationship with the past. The past becomes something that happened rather than somewhere you continue living. This same movement of release appears when you consider control. There are so many things you may want to control because you care deeply. You want your children to make good choices. You want someone you love to understand what you see. You want your relationship to survive. You want your body to remain strong. You want your plans to work. You want tomorrow to be safe. These desires are human. But suffering often begins when care becomes attachment to one specific outcome. Imagine planting a garden. You prepare the soil carefully. You place the seed in the earth. You water it. You make sure it receives light. These actions matter, but you cannot pull the seed open. You cannot command the rain. You cannot stand over the soil and demand that life move according to your schedule. At some point, gardening becomes trust. Life is much the same. You participate. You choose. You act. You speak honestly. You offer love. You set boundaries. You make intentions. And then there comes a place where your control ends. The ego experiences this boundary as danger. The deeper self may experience it as surrender. Surrender is often misunderstood as giving up. But perhaps surrender is not saying nothing matters. Perhaps it is saying, I will do what belongs to me, and I will release what does not. There is tremendous peace in learning the difference. Suppose you love someone who is making choices you would not make. You explain your concerns. You offer support. You remain available in ways that are healthy. But eventually you discover that you cannot live their life for them. If you try, their journey becomes your anxiety. You wake thinking about their choices. You go to sleep imagining their future. You believe that your worry is proof of love. But perhaps love does not always say, "Let me control this for you." Sometimes love says, "I trust that your life has lessons I cannot learn on your behalf." And then you release them without withdrawing your love. This can be difficult because the ego often confuses attachment with love. Attachment says, "I need you to behave in a certain way so that I can be peaceful." Love says, "I care about you deeply, and I am learning not to make my inner state dependent upon controlling yours." This does not make you cold. It may actually make your love cleaner. You stop loving from fear. You stop giving in order to guarantee something in return. You stop using kindness as an invisible contract. You simply offer what is true within you, and this brings you closer to intention. Intention, in a spiritual sense, is very different from forcing life to obey your wishes. You may have been taught to think of intention as a way of making the universe give you exactly what you want, but perhaps there is another way. Instead of asking, "How can I make life produce this outcome?" you might ask, "What quality do I want to bring to life regardless of the outcome?" Do you want to bring peace? Bring peace to the conversation. Do you want love? Become more available to loving. Do you want kindness? Let kindness move through your ordinary interactions. Do you want forgiveness? Begin noticing where you still withhold it. Do you want connection with the source? Become quiet enough to notice where that connection is already present. This changes the direction of your attention. You stop standing before life with an empty container saying, "Give me what I need." You begin asking, "What can move through me?" Perhaps this is what alignment feels like. Not having every circumstance arranged perfectly. Not getting everything you desire, but becoming inwardly aligned with the qualities you once searched for outside yourself. You become less interested in demanding love and more interested in being loving. Less interested in proving your worth and more interested in living from it. Less interested in controlling life and more interested in meeting life consciously. There is a story repeated in many different forms in ordinary human lives. A person spends years waiting for someone to choose them. Perhaps they remain emotionally attached to a relationship that never fully arrives. The other person gives enough attention to maintain hope, but never enough presence to create security, so they wait. They interpret every message. They explain every absence. They tell themselves that patience is love. But underneath the patience is often a painful belief. When this person finally chooses me, I will know that I am worthy. Then one day, something changes. Not necessarily in the relationship, inside. They realize they have spent years standing outside a door asking another person to open it, and suddenly they understand that there is another door behind them. It leads back to themselves. They turn around. At first, this feels like loss. They grieve the future they imagined. They grieve the person they hoped the other would become. They grieve the version of themselves who waited so faithfully. But gradually the grief creates space. They begin sleeping more peacefully. They begin hearing their own thoughts again. They begin noticing how much energy was being spent interpreting someone else's behavior. And perhaps for the first time in years, they ask, "What does my own heart need from me?" This is not selfishness. It is reunion. You may have experienced some version of this, perhaps not in romance. Maybe you spent years waiting for a parent's approval. You built a life, hoping that one day they would look at you and say, "I see you. I am proud of you. You were always enough." Perhaps they said it. Perhaps they never did. But there may come a moment when you realize that the child within you cannot spend the rest of your life standing at that door. You can become the loving presence that child was waiting for. You can say inwardly, "You do not have to earn your place here." You can offer yourself the compassion you kept requesting from someone who may never have learned how to give it. And strangely, when you stop demanding that another person heal the wound, you may become more capable of seeing them clearly. You may recognize that they had wounds too. This does not erase responsibility. It simply expands understanding. A person who never learned how to express love may have struggled to offer it. A person consumed by their own fear may have passed fear into the lives around them. A person who felt unworthy may have unconsciously taught you to question your worth. Seeing this does not make harmful behavior right. It simply allows compassion to exist beside truth. And compassion can loosen chains that judgment cannot. Perhaps this is why love is stronger than fear. Fear contracts. It divides the world into enemies and threats. Love expands the field of understanding. It allows you to say, what you did hurt me, and I refuse to become what hurt me. That is a profound kind of freedom. You do not need revenge to become whole. You do not need everyone who misunderstood you to eventually discover that you were right. You do not need the people who rejected you to regret their decision. Imagine how much energy becomes available when you stop rehearsing those imaginary victories. You can use that energy to be present. You can use it to notice the morning light, to listen when someone speaks, to breathe before reacting, to care for your body, to forgive, to create, to rest, to simply be alive. This is the hidden cost of resentment and attachment. They do not only connect you to the past, they consume the energy that could be meeting the present. And the present is where life keeps waiting for you. Not next year. Not after everything is resolved. Here, maybe you are walking through uncertainty right now. Perhaps something you depended upon has changed. You do not know where your relationship is going. You do not know what your next chapter will look like. You do not know whether the answer you hope for will arrive. There is a temptation in uncertainty to demand a sign. Tell me everything will be okay. But what if trust is deeper than knowing everything will happen the way you want? What if trust means knowing that whatever arrives, you can meet it without abandoning yourself? This is a different kind of security. It is not security built from prediction. It is security built from presence. You may not know what the river will look like around the next bend, but you can learn to move with the water. A river does not need to see the ocean in order to continue. It follows its nature. It moves around rocks. It changes direction. Sometimes it becomes quiet. Sometimes it moves quickly. But it does not become less of a river because the landscape changes. Perhaps your life has been doing the same. You have moved around obstacles. You have survived changes you once thought would destroy you. You have been lost and found direction. You have loved and lost. You have been certain and then uncertain again. And through every version of the landscape, something within you kept moving. Could you trust that movement a little more? Not blindly, not irresponsibly, simply enough to stop demanding that you know the entire path before taking the next peaceful step. There is a beautiful humility in this. You begin to say, I do not know. And instead of hearing failure in those words, you hear openness. I do not know what happens next. I do not know why this ended. I do not know whether this person will change. I do not know what life is preparing, but I am here. I can choose how I meet this moment. And perhaps this is where gratitude becomes something deeper than positive thinking. Gratitude is not pretending everything is wonderful. It is becoming available to what is still here. You may be grieving and still notice sunlight through a window. You may be uncertain and still feel grateful for one person who listens. You may be healing and still appreciate the breath moving through your body. You may not have the life you imagined, but there may still be life everywhere you look. Gratitude returns your attention from absence to presence. The ego counts what is missing. Awareness notices what remains. And often what remains is enough for this moment. One breath, one quiet morning, one honest conversation, one chance to begin again, one opportunity to respond differently than you did yesterday. You do not need to transform your entire life tonight. Spiritual awakening may be much quieter than that. It might happen when you feel the old urge to chase someone and choose stillness instead. It might happen when resentment rises and you refuse to feed it another story. It might happen when anxiety asks for certainty and you answer with a breath. It might happen when someone misunderstands you and you realize you do not have to abandon yourself in order to change their mind. These moments may look small, but a seed looks small too. Inside it is an entire tree. Each conscious moment plants something. You may not see the roots immediately, but over time, you begin living differently. You stop reacting to every emotional storm. You stop chasing every person who pulls away. You stop interpreting every ending as proof that you are unworthy. You become less interested in being chosen because you have stopped rejecting yourself. And then something beautiful happens. Relationships begin to feel different. You no longer approach people asking them silently, will you complete me? You can meet them as another whole human being. You can enjoy their presence without trying to possess it. You can love them without asking them to heal every old wound. You can allow them to have bad days without assuming you caused them. You can allow them to disagree with you without losing yourself. You can even allow them to leave, if leaving is what life requires. There may still be sadness, but sadness and inner abandonment are not the same thing. You can lose someone without losing yourself. You can be alone without believing you have been forgotten. You can walk through silence without filling it immediately. Because solitude begins to reveal something companionship can sometimes hide. You are never truly empty. Sit quietly enough and notice there is breath, there is awareness, there is life. There is a presence beneath the personality that does not need applause. And perhaps the source is not somewhere far beyond you, waiting for you to become spiritual enough to deserve connection. Perhaps the source is expressed in the very life that is breathing through you now. The wave does not need to search for the ocean. It only needs to remember what it is made of. Maybe you are like that wave. You have spent so much time looking across the water for someone to tell you that you belong to the ocean that you forgot to notice what has been carrying you all along. And once you remember nobody is coming no longer sounds lonely, it becomes sacred. Nobody is coming to become your source because the source was never outside you. Nobody is coming to manufacture your worth because worth was never something another person could create. Nobody is coming to give you permission to forgive, release, love, trust, or begin again. Those doors open from within. And perhaps you can stop waiting now, not because you have given up on people, because you have stopped giving up on yourself. You can welcome love when it arrives. You can receive help when it is offered. You can lean on someone when the road is difficult. You can allow yourself to be cared for. But underneath all of it, there is a quiet knowing. I am not asking you to complete me. I am not asking you to become responsible for my peace. I am not asking you to rescue me from myself. I meet you from the wholeness I am learning to remember. This is where love becomes freer. This is where forgiveness becomes possible. This is where uncertainty becomes less frightening. And this is where you begin to understand that returning to yourself was never about becoming independent from life. It was about becoming aligned with it. You are not a separate creature fighting against the current. You belong to the river. You belong to the seasons. You belong to this mysterious movement of beginnings and endings, meetings and departures, certainty and uncertainty. And perhaps peace comes when you stop asking the river to become still before you trust yourself to float. You soften, you release, you allow, and underneath everything you thought you needed, something quiet remains, something loving, something aware, something that has been with you through every chapter. Your true self did not arrive today. It was here when you were afraid. It was here when you were rejected. It was here when you were lost. It was here when you were waiting for someone to come. You simply could not always hear it beneath the noise. Now perhaps you can, and the voice is not shouting. It does not need to. It simply reminds you, you can stop waiting. You are already home. And when you begin to understand that you are already home, life does not suddenly become free of difficulty. People will still misunderstand you. Plans will still change. There will still be mornings when anxiety appears before you have even opened your eyes, and evenings when an old memory returns without invitation. There will still be moments when you want someone to tell you what to do, reassure you that everything will work out, or take away the uncertainty you are carrying. But something within you can be different. You no longer have to interpret every difficult moment as evidence that you have lost your way. You begin to understand that peace is not a life without storms. Peace is discovering that there is something within you deeper than the storm. And this understanding can become part of the way you live. Perhaps tomorrow morning, before reaching for your phone and allowing the world to tell you what deserves your attention, you can remain still for a few moments. Feel your breathing. Notice the quiet before the mind begins naming everything. You do not need to accomplish anything in that silence. You do not need to force yourself into a spiritual state. Simply notice that before the worries return, before the roles return, before the unfinished conversations return, there is awareness. You are here. Sometimes that is enough. And when the mind begins moving again, perhaps you can watch it with kindness. If it says, "What if something goes wrong today?" you do not need to argue. You can simply return to this moment, this breath, this room, this step. The future will arrive when it arrives. You do not have to live it before it gets here. Throughout the day, you might begin noticing the moments when you unconsciously hand your peace to someone else. Perhaps you send a message and become anxious when there is no reply. Perhaps someone gives you a strange look and your mind immediately begins wondering what you did wrong. Perhaps you see someone else's life and suddenly feel behind. These moments can become invitations rather than problems. You can quietly ask yourself, what am I asking the outside world to give me right now? Approval? Certainty? Worth? Permission? Then ask another question. Is there some part of this that I can offer myself? Maybe you can offer yourself patience, maybe understanding, maybe permission to rest, maybe permission not to know, maybe simply the reminder that another person's response cannot determine the value of your existence. This is how inner freedom becomes practical, not through one enormous realization, but through hundreds of small returns. Again and again, you come home. You will forget. Then you will remember. You will become attached. Then you will notice. You will react from fear. Then awareness will return. There is no need to turn spiritual growth into another standard you must perfectly achieve. Even the desire to become perfectly peaceful can become another form of resistance. A tree does not become angry with itself because winter arrived. It allows the season. You can learn to offer yourself the same patience. There may also be someone you are ready to forgive. Perhaps you cannot forgive everything today. You do not need to force it. You might simply notice what carrying the resentment is costing you. Ask yourself whether you want this person to continue living inside your thoughts. Ask whether the old event deserves another morning, another evening, another year of your attention. And if something within you feels ready, you might quietly say, I am willing to release what I no longer need to carry. You are not declaring that what happened was right. You are choosing not to keep injuring yourself with what has already happened. Forgiveness may come slowly. Let it. A river does not remove a stone by fighting it. Water moves around it, touches it again, and over time, even sharp edges become smooth. Let your awareness be like that water, gentle, patient, persistent without force. And perhaps gratitude can become another way of returning. At the end of the day, rather than asking only what went wrong, notice what was quietly given. Maybe someone smiled at you. Maybe your body carried you through another day. Maybe you heard rain against a window. Maybe there was food on the table. Maybe you had one honest conversation. Maybe nothing extraordinary happened, and you were simply alive to experience an ordinary day. There is something sacred about ordinary life when you stop demanding that every moment become something else. The ego is always waiting for the next thing, the next achievement, the next relationship, the next answer, the next version of yourself. But the deeper self can sit quietly beside a cup of tea and recognize that life is already happening. You do not need to postpone gratitude until everything is resolved. And you do not need to postpone love either. If you want more love in your life, notice where love can move through you today. Perhaps it is listening without preparing your response. Perhaps it is allowing someone to be imperfect. Perhaps it is speaking gently to yourself after making a mistake. Perhaps it is setting a boundary without hatred. Perhaps it is releasing the need to win an argument. Love does not always look dramatic. Often it looks like peace, choosing not to become another conflict. And slowly, you may discover that the words "do it alone" no longer mean what they once did. They do not mean you must carry everything by yourself. Ask for help when you need it. Accept kindness. Allow people to love you. Let someone sit beside you when the night feels long. There is no spiritual wisdom in refusing genuine support merely to prove that you are strong. The invitation is subtler than that. Receive love without making another person responsible for creating your worth. Receive guidance without surrendering your inner knowing. Receive companionship without abandoning yourself to keep it. Walk beside others without asking them to walk your inner path for you, because some choices remain yours. Only you can decide when resentment has lived inside you long enough. Only you can notice when fear is speaking louder than love. Only you can become aware of the stories you keep repeating. Only you can release the identity built around what happened yesterday. And only you can become still enough to recognize the presence that has been quietly waiting beneath all of it. Perhaps this is what spiritual independence truly means. Not separation. Connection without dependency. Love without possession. Trust without guarantees. Forgiveness without needing an apology. Peace without requiring the world to become peaceful first. You stop standing at the door of life asking, who is coming to save me? You turn inward and discover that you were never waiting for another person as much as you were waiting to remember yourself. The one who could sit with your fear, the one who could stop abandoning your own heart, the one who could finally say, I do not know what happens next, but I will not leave myself while I find out. There is extraordinary tenderness in that realization, because when you stop asking to be rescued, you may also stop seeing yourself as someone who needs rescuing. You begin seeing yourself as life itself, moving through another season, sometimes blooming, sometimes resting, sometimes losing leaves, sometimes beginning again, but always connected to something deeper than the temporary form of the moment. And perhaps tonight, when the world becomes quiet, you can remember the ocean. A wave rises and falls. For a brief moment, it appears separate. It has a shape, a direction, a beginning, an ending. Yet it was never separate from the water. Neither are you. Perhaps the source has never been far away. Perhaps you have simply been searching for it in places that could never permanently contain it. In approval, in relationships, in certainty, in recognition, in another person's ability to understand you. And when those things failed to give you lasting peace, you thought something was missing. But maybe nothing was missing. Maybe you were being invited inward, back to awareness, back to forgiveness, back to gratitude, back to love, back to the quiet place where you do not have to prove that you deserve to exist. So when fear returns, notice it. When attachment returns, notice it. When you begin waiting for someone else to make you whole, notice that too. Do not condemn yourself. Just remember that you can breathe before reacting. Remember that you can release what you cannot control. Remember that another person's inability to see your worth cannot remove it. Remember that forgiveness is a door you can open from your side. Remember that uncertainty does not mean abandonment. Remember that being alone for a moment does not mean being separate from life. And remember that you are not trying to become some perfect, fearless, spiritually enlightened version of yourself. You are simply removing what keeps you from recognizing what has always been there. The love beneath the fear, the stillness beneath the noise, the awareness beneath the story, the light behind the clouds, the ocean within the wave. Maybe nobody is coming, and perhaps someday those words will no longer frighten you. Perhaps they will feel like freedom, because you will know that you can walk your own inner path while still holding the hands of those you love. You can accept support without surrendering yourself. You can experience loss without losing your deepest identity. You can face uncertainty without demanding an answer from tomorrow. And you can meet this moment without waiting for someone else to make it worthy of being lived. You are here. Life is here. Love is still available. And beneath everything that has happened to you, there is a quiet presence that has never left. Perhaps you have known it all along. Perhaps you simply forgot. And now you are remembering. If something in this journey spoke to a place within you that has been waiting to be heard, you are welcome to share your reflection in the comments. Sometimes putting one realization into words helps us see more clearly what we are ready to release. And if you would like to continue exploring inner peace, awareness, forgiveness, and the quiet journey back to your true self, you can subscribe and return whenever you need another moment of stillness. Until then, you do not need to rush. You do not need to prove anything. You do not need to know the entire road ahead. Take the next step with awareness. Release what is no longer yours to carry. Let love guide what fear once controlled. Trust the life moving quietly within you. And wherever the path leads, remember this. You were never waiting for someone else to bring you home. The home you were searching for has been within you all along.